So, yeah, I'm going to talk about JSON-LD, but I begin with saying that I can't imagine you being in this meeting if you don't know JSON already. Yeah, so let's not even talk about it. Everyone knows, everyone on the web works with JSON. Every programming language supports it. And JSON-LD is just regular JSON with a little bit of extra, yeah, but still valid JSON syntax. It is used to describe objects in a uniform way, and it's especially used to link JSON objects together. So you can have the regular JSON objects in a database like you could in MongoDB or Couchbase, but you can also now look at your set of objects as a graph and do very complex graph operations. So why is JSON-LD important for business? Well, if you're in e-commerce, there's no escaping. You have to get to JSON-LD, yeah, because the big search engines force you to mark up your products in micro formats, and JSON-LD is now preferred. And one of the interesting things is that because we read JSON-LD, you actually can look at your JSON-LD in our visualization tool Graph. So I'll do that at various times in this next half hour. Then say you're already very familiar with the document store, but you have an application where you have many different types of documents, and these documents together form a very complex graph. Well, then it gets really hard in a system like MongoDB to do complex graph search, yeah, and then you just should try AllegroGraph as a document/graph store. Yeah? And then finally, if you are interested in building your knowledge graphs, every customer we now talk to wants to build their own knowledge graph. There's no way you can do that in a document store alone. You need to go graphs. So if you want to build your own knowledge graph, this is a way to go forward. So how is JSON-LD used in e-commerce? Well, as I said, the big search engines want you to use it. So for example, if you type facial oil in Bing, then you get at the top these nice pictures. And the only reason why they show up is because you used microformat in your page. Yeah, if you type the same question in Google, you get a different selection here, probably depending on how much you paid. And here you get the regular knowledge graph representation of facial oils. And again, it shows up at the top of your search space because they used markup, and then especially JSON-LD as a markup. Yeah, so let's look at just one example. So I'm interested in this facial oil called hippie oil or mad hippie. You go here, and then if you would right click on the page and you look at the source, then you get a snippet. Well, you get the source for that particular page that you were looking at. And then if you just search for add context, then you'll find in that page multiple JSON-LD objects. Yeah, so here's your JSON object. I try to make it a little bit blue, and here you see the data that then the search engines can use. So now, if we look closer at the thing that I just extracted from the web page, if I just look at the source and I take out all the JSON-LD stuff, I would get a JSON object like this. Yeah, I would get an aggregate rating with the rating value and a review count. But this would be without any meaning. It would be just terms. Yeah, so there's no semantics to this particular JSON object. But if I want to add semantics to a JSON object, then I have to add only a few little things. The first thing is I have to add a context. And that context can be another JSON object, or it can be a link to, say, a schema definition somewhere else on the web. Yeah, and I'm going to show you that, talk a little bit more about schema.org in a second. Then you always want to say what the type of your product is, because then it makes it easier in your search and for various different purposes. And so what you see here is that the only thing we added is type, and now we actually know what the meaning is of this JSON object. And the search engines can do something with it. And a nice byproduct of our tool AllegroGraph together with Graph is actually you can take any of these JSON-LD objects that you get out of the web and just show them as a structured object in our outline view in Graph, and I'll show you in a minute. Or you can even use a visualization tool, and you can look at all the features and to see whether your objects actually make sense. Yeah, so this is a representation of the same hippie oil but then in AllegroGraph. Again, I'm also assuming that most of you in the audience know about AllegroGraph and our tool Graph. All right, then you saw in that JSON-LD object for hippie oil, the link to schema.org. So that is one of these schemas defined for JSON-LD and for markup languages. It really pays off to once go there, especially if you are in SEO or you have products on the web. And you'll see it's not e-commerce, it's actually many different types of things that are supported: creative works, books, movies, music recordings, but health and medical types, etc., etc. Yeah. So just have a look at it, and if you just look at one of them, is product. So we looked at product as an example, and we saw that the hippie oil had an aggregate rating. Well, here you see that aggregated rating is defined in this particular schema or ontology. Yeah, and then if you look around on the web, you find that yes, there's many types that you can use to mark up your data, but by now Google officially says that JSON-LD is the recommended type. Yeah, and by the way, you'll get that presentation later on, so don't even try to read all the text here. And by the way, I also apologize, but there's a really strong rain going on suddenly here. All right, then another way that you can use JSON-LD is a communication format, yeah, between different types of services, or as an API language. And so if you, for example, type in Google Michelangelo, yeah, you get this beautiful box here with metadata about him. And if you wanted to use the Google API to get information about Michelangelo, then you can use their API, and what you see is that basically what you get back as results for your Google Knowledge search, your data as a JSON-LD object. And you could load it directly in AllegroGraph and do interesting things with it. All right. That's just how Google uses it, but many different services and places on the web are now supporting it as a communication format. So, for example, this new phenomenon called the LEI, stands for Legal Entity Identifier. It's a technology pushed by governments and banks, so that every company and legal entity in the world gets their own number, which makes it way easier to track transactions on the web, to do fraud analytics both for banks and for governments. And LEI is not like something owned by one company, but it's an open source technology. So, for example, I type in a particular company, like this company Macrolab USA Inc. Yeah, what I get back is this page, but I can also export the data by clicking on this link here. And in Graph, I would see then all the metadata about that particular company that I was looking at. Yeah, and again, you'll get this presentation. Don't even try to go here, but you could try it for yourself. Okay, so that was how JSON-LD is used in e-commerce, or how it's used more and more as a communication format, communication language. And now let's talk about how you use it in AllegroGraph as a document. So again, what I said in the beginning, if you have many different types of JSON objects, and these objects are linked together in the graph, and maybe optionally you even need to work with taxonomies and ontology, then try AllegroGraph as a JSON-LD store and a semantic graph database all at the same time. And as I said before, you probably already work with MongoDB or Couchbase or any other document store. Yeah, just try it out and play with it. So we made sure it's very easy to use. One of the reasons why I really like it is that, say you work in Python, where one of the core data structures is the dictionary. Well, we can actually just add and retrieve dictionaries directly into the database. And it's described here in our online tutorial with the address here. Again, it will show you, just Google for JSON-LD and AllegroGraph, or anyway, you'll find it out. Yeah. So I'm going to give a demo. So I'm going to show how you can use JSON-LD as just an input format for RDF triples or a semantic graph, but also how you can add and retrieve Python dictionaries directly, yeah, like any other document database. where in our case, we take a JSON object and we index it as triples. But if you want to, you can also store the entire object itself, so retrieval becomes very fast. And then if you want to do SPARQL queries over your objects, you can, just like any other data representation, get individual elements of an object, or you can retrieve the whole thing, the whole object itself, directly into as a dictionary back into the Python. So let me show you that. Let me go to the demonstration. So here I have a Python open, and and let me go to the top. So again, AllegroGraph, the AllegroGraph Python interface is now part of Anaconda. So, or you can install it with pip directly in your virtual environment, or if you are a fan of Anaconda like I am, you can install it directly in Anaconda and you have AllegroGraph installed. Yeah, and then all you have to do to work with AllegroGraph is do some import statements that I needed for this demo. So here are the typical imports. And again, we'll also make this file available if you want to play with it. Actually, it's in our tutorial, everything I'm showing you here. So I'm taking a few statements here. Oh, it would help, obviously, if I first started the Python. So I have a Python here. And let me put these elements in here. So just to make things simple, I created a little function OpenDB, but this is all you need to do when you open the database. That's it. And a little function to show triples that I need in my demo. So this is all you need to do to get statements out of AllegroGraph, and then print the statements at a certain limit. Okay, so now I'm going to open the database. So I say con is OpenDB. I already have a database JSON play. Let's see how many triples are in there. Con size 9 triples. Okay, let me do con.clear. So now I have an empty database. And now let's create our first JSON-LD object and put it in the database. So here we have a JSON. So I'll teach you a little bit of JSON-LD if you didn't know it already. Yeah. So without this part, you would have a regular Python dictionary, which you then can translate directly into JSON. Yeah, so nothing special about it. Adding this makes it. A JSON-LD because I provide a context. Yeah, it's an attribute with the @ in the beginning, and then what you get within here are just replacement rules. Think of them as replacement rules. Yeah. So every time when I see the string ical in the JSON object, replace it with this full URI. And every time when I see XSD, then replace it with XML schema. And every time when I see something like ical tt start, then the data type of the value is an XSD datetime. By the way, if I can say one thing, if you want to learn JSON-LD, well, working with AllegroGraph is one way to do it, but you can also go to JSON-LD/org/playground, and there you'll find a whole bunch of interesting examples that are translated into triples. Yeah, so if you want to learn, I would always recommend go there first before you go to the specification. Anyway, so I have a dictionary in the. Well, let me put it in the Python. So I have the dictionary here. Yeah, I could print the event. Yeah, so here's the event, and now I can add it to the database. And all I have to say is connection add data event, and now it's in the database. Yeah, I can say show triples, show me what's in the database, and here you see the triples. Now I'm guessing that part of the audience is actually deep into the semantic space, and like most of us, we don't really like the blank notes. Yeah, it's kind of ugly. These blank notes here as the root of the object. And the other thing is there's a type missing, yeah, which we also don't like because we kind of have the hygiene to put a type on every object that we have. So how do we add a nice URI root to the object, and how do we add the type? Well, here's how we do that. So, because this is a Python dictionary, I can say the ID of the event is iCal event, and the type of the event is iCal event. Yeah, so I add this up here, and so now when I do print event again, I see we nicely added this. Yeah, so now we have a root. So now let me clear the database. Now we see we first clear the database, and now when we add the event, show triples. Now we see that we have a nice root. Yeah, and we added a event type to the whole thing. So if I would show you this in graph, open triple store, JSON play, and then I would say show some sample triples. Now you see that we have an event, and because I gave it a type, it has a nice color, and here we see the various attributes as triples. I can also double click on this here. Yeah, and here you see the various triples for the event. Now I can push the button 8 here, and you see actually the underlying URIs, but most human beings don't like to look at that, so we usually hit the letter 8 again, and we see the nice human readable notation. So let's go back to my Python tutorial. Yeah. I'm going to need a little function test that all it does, it is clears the database, and then there's a, well, I don't even need to do the commit, so we're not doing a session here. I add the data, and then I show the triples. So I have a definition. So this is the function that I want to try, the function test. And let me also make a person. Yeah, so we have a person where the definition is at schema.org. Yeah, and we gave it a type and an ID, and then the name is J. Doe. She's a professor, telephone number, and this is the URL that she has. And so I can put the person there. So now I have the person in the database, and now if I say test person, we get this. Now the first time you saw it took a little hiccup to get this person in the database, and that is because if you use schema.org, that's actually a schema that is like 130K of data, so it's a huge ontology. So we actually use the timeout parameter and the caching parameter from schema.org, and so we, in AllegroGraph, we cache that thing, so the next time it was super fast, as you saw. Yeah. So now I had a person in the database for test. Now let's see. This was one person, but is this fast if you want to add a whole bunch of objects? So let's define a function, add 1,000. So for the Python people in the audience, yeah, what does this function do? It I make a variable x, and I make it for I in the range from 0 to 1,000. I make a deep copy of person, and then for every element in x, I change the ID to a person with a unique ID. Yeah, so basically I create 1,000 people. Yeah, they're all the same except the ID is different. So if I say x is 1,000, yeah, now my x is actually 1,000 objects long. Yeah, here's still the first element in that person. And now I could say test x, because you can also add a list of objects. And here you see that I added 1,000 objects. I can add close to just for this 5,000 objects per second in the database. Let me do this actually do again, test x, and let me only print max print, say 10. Max print is 10. Yeah, so I added 1,000 of these objects in X to the database, and then I printed the first 10 triples in my database. Yeah, so if you want to do a lot of JSON-LD objects, it's still super fast. Okay, so I did that. Now, sometimes you want to work with the context directly, or you want to manipulate the context. So what we do here is we get from the JSON-LD org website the person schema. Yeah, so this is a part actually of schema.org. So here I create a context. So I'm using the request framework to go out to the web. And then I get this particular address. I turn the result into JSON. This is a request method. And then I take the context of the object that I got back. So now I have the context. If I print the context, yeah, you see how, well, basically you see that a person is of type person. And you see for each of the attributes that you might have in a person, how you have to translate it into triples. And you also see the types, the data types. So if you get a birth date, then you'll turn it actually in an XSD date. Yeah, so this is a nice way to play, and now you could manipulate it. And obviously you can add the context to something. So I can say the context for person is no longer a link, but it's just the context itself. Yeah, so I can take this over here. And so now my person is way bigger. I create a person because now I have the whole context in there instead of the link. Yeah, and then I can again do test person. Yeah, and the person is in the database. We don't turn the context itself into triples, so don't worry about that part. Yeah, even if you add the big context, we'll only take those triples here. All right, and then let's show you about what I mean when I say that a bunch of you can add a graph in a database. Sorry, you can take a set of documents and turn them into a graph. So I made a very tiny little context for a child, which is the object of a child will be in a URI. A brother of is also a URI, and a birth date is a datetime. And then I define 3 people. Person 1, and this is person 1, and this is the birth date, and this has got 2 children, person 2 and person 3, and then here's the 2 children. Yeah, and then person 2 is actually the brother of person 3 that is defined here. So I can take all of this and I put it in Python. Yeah, and then I can say, well, let's test person 1 and person 2 and person 3, and I put it in the database. And now if I would look in graph, and I go to the graph view, and I say again, display all the triples or some sample triples. Now you see I have a graph in the database, yeah? And I could do graph search and all kinds of interesting social network analytics. Not that you can do that on 3 triples, but you get the point, yeah? So this is how you literally create documents and then a graph on top. All right, going back to my Emacs. So then just for fun, in our tutorial that you can find on the web, we added a little bit of helper functions to play with objects. So let me import this. This file is also in the documentation. Let me create a little function to store objects. So we say store for a connection an object, and sometimes you want to clear the database first because this is all demo, of course, and then you add the data object, which can be one object or a list. Allow external references is true means that you can use links to outside of your domain. And this is important, and also store the whole JSON-LD object as the source itself in the database. Yeah, because this makes it faster. So I add this, I take this, and now let's take an event again that you already have. So we store, so this to show that it works, we store the event in the database. And now if I go back to my graph, and sorry for switching my screen all the time, but now if I go back in the database and I say display some sample, oh, wrong button, display some sample triples, Then here you see the event, yeah, which is in New Orleans. It's a Lady Gaga concert. This is the particular date, and we also have the full JSON-LD object in here, and we also make sure that we indent it in a very nice way, so you can actually read what you have in your JSON-LD object. I hope this makes sense. All right. So this is the object we add. So now we do something that we haven't seen before. We also store the JSON object itself in the database. And now let's do some SHACL on this. Yeah, so I need two more namespaces, one for the JSON-LD metadata that we use to store the object, and we need ICAL because we want to do SHACL queries with ICAL. So basically what this function does is add some namespace abbreviations to the database. So we do this one and this one. And then let's retrieve from our connection everything that is an ICAL event. Yeah, so, well, we have only one event in the database, so it's not a really hard query. But yeah, but note that I use the word this. This is important. This is just a demo function retrieve. You can write your own in any possible way you want to. But I wrote something where this is the SHACL block, yeah, of a query. And if you use the word this, it will give you back the source. So if I just now do retrieve this, yeah, now I get the object event back. And then if I wanted to, I can say pretty print the results of that first object here. Yeah. And I would get my object back as a regular event. Yeah. So retrieve will always return a list of objects that it can find for this. So just for fun, in the tutorial that you can follow on the web, so you can do the entire tutorial that I showed you today. This is an abbreviated version, but you can just follow the instructions in our documentation. So we built a list of every example object in the JSON-LD Play Store. We put it into a variable called OBS, objects. And so let me show you what's in there. So one object from JSON-LD here is a recipe for a cocktail, the Mojito cocktail. And there's also a nice object for a used Tesla, if you wanted to. There's an object for the Empire State Building as a place, yeah, or the hippie oil that I like to use as my example, etc., etc. So all these objects are in there, in that one object. So let me store that object in the database. So I take this. Oh, what's that one here? Yeah, it's in the database now. So now I have all these objects in the database. And I can do queries on top of that. But before I do the query, it's also kind of fun to create a free text index on the source. So I create a free text index on all the objects in the stored objects. I can create a free text index for every predicate separately, or I can do it for separately, or do all of them. But I chose just for this little demo to do the JSON blobs. Yeah, so I do that. And then let me do some queries. So one thing would be, give me all the, okay, let me say what I'm going to do right now. So we store the source, but you still can look into the object itself, of course. So I can do a regular query where I say, for every S in my data set, give me the type, yeah? And so basically I take this expression, and here I get, let me, for element in X, print element. Yeah, so cocktail 1 is of type cocktail. The individual and the vehicle don't have a root. Tesla does have a root. The place has a root. Hippie oil is a type product, etc. Yeah, so even when I retrieve objects, you now see I can do SHACL queries, but what I get back is I get elements back as JSON objects. Yeah, so it's really, even for regular SHACL queries, you can get your results back as JSON and our dictionaries and instantly work with them and do interesting things. And here's how we use the free text indexing. So we say, give me all the objects back, yeah, as a full object that match Lady Gaga, yeah. And if I now look at X, then I get that event that we've talked about ad nauseam, yeah. Or give me everything that has the word hippie in it, yeah, and I get my hippie oil that we have come to love, yeah. And then one more query. So as you remember, in the objects was also used Tesla. So I need one more namespace for good relations, another ontology used in e-commerce. And I could do a complex query like, give me everything that matches Fast and Furious, yeah, and where the accepted payment method is cash and the price specification is price, with the price has a particular currency value and the currency is USD and the value is over $80,000. Yeah, so this is a complex query to find something in your database, and I can take that query and here is my Tesla. Yeah, pretty print X0, and here I have my Tesla. All right, so that was my Python demonstration, and this is okay. I have to go back to my PowerPoint presentation. Yeah. So why do I think e-commerce is important for business? Well, if you're in e-commerce, again, there's no escaping. You have to. And again, I hope I made clear that if you have a document store, but you have many types of documents and together they're a complex graph, then you really should try out AllegroGraph with this technology. And of course, if you want to build knowledge graph, and that's all we seem to do right now for our customers, then it's a wonderful way to get people to insert data in the knowledge graph. All right, so that's the end of my talk. Let me just talk a little bit more about what's coming up in our series. On April the 3rd, we'll give a talk about speech recognition, knowledge graphs, and AI for intelligent customer operations. And what I will do is go into detail about this particular slide here, how we ingest all kinds of different kinds of text, put it into a knowledge graph, and then use entity extractors and sentiment analysis, text classifiers, core occurrences, and semantic search. They're all built into our knowledge graph technology. And then real soon, I hope even in April, we have to have a first implementation of SHACL in the server. So if that's an interest to you, we now have a SHACL that you can try out. If you're interested, you can start playing with it. And that was all I wanted to do today. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jans. If anyone has questions, if you'd like to go ahead and type that into the question box. We've got a couple here that have popped up along the way. So here, why don't we start with this first one here, Jans? It's the first question is, in the past, you integrated with MongoDB. Do you still support this approach?
Yes, we still support, if you want to work, if you already have MongoDB, but you need AllegroGraph to do your graph queries, then you can directly link in AllegroGraph with MongoDB, and we support it in our SPARQL queries. And a really cool thing with the latest version, AllegroGraph 6.5.0, is we now also support two-phase commits. Yeah, so in the old days, you as the user had to take care that the commit went both to AllegroGraph and Mongo, but Mongo supports two-phase commit, and we support it. So now you can let the application do the commits.
Okay, great. Let's see, another one here. Let's say, can I use Prolog with JSON-LD and JSON?
Yeah, well, yes. What you saw is that JSON-LD objects get turned into tuples, so you can just use Prolog directly on top of that.
Okay, so we got another question here, a topic near and dear to my heart, blockchain related. The question, do you see AllegroGraph being used as, say, a world state database in blockchain, for example, Hyperledger or Fabric?
Well,
I'll point out to you, Jans, that we do have an article that we can repost, or it's on our blog page, where we talk about directed acyclical graphs that might be interesting for you to have a look at.
So we remember I showed you this company that provides legal entity identifiers, and they have actually built a blockchain technology based on top of graphs. And so I think there's very interesting possibilities for using, and one of the advantages of their approach, of that approach, is it's fairly scalable. You don't need to have a whole block. You take 2 random leaves of a history graph and use that for your blockchain and your blockchain hashes. So I think there's promises there for blockchain. Yes. Oh, someone asked about.
Okay, that's great. So let's see. Let's take 2 more here. There's a question: how can we query websites that use JSON-LD?
Oh. Well, we do several projects where we use Chromium and Selenium. We get the results out. Most of the time, the things you're looking for will be hidden if you don't use Chromium, because if you just do a wget or curl, in many cases it still remains hidden. But once you get you really use Chromium, then somewhere in there you just get the text, and then you just turn the output in text, and then you look for context, and you have your object. It's pretty simple. But yeah, you can't do a regular query. You would have to. That would be a nice business idea, to take all the JSON-LD objects from all the e-commerce websites, put it in the database, and do cool queries.
Okay, thanks, John. Why don't we just take one last question here, and we'll wrap it up. The last question here is: does Graph support other triple stores?
Yes. Well, we prefer that you use AllegroGraph, but if you want to use Graph, then there's other databases supported. We now support almost all features in Stardock, but also if you want to use Vertuo. With some triple stores that we work with, they support, say, graph algorithms that we then can execute in Graph, and then in other situations we can't do some things in Graph, but most of the visualization stuff all works fine, including building queries automatically.
Okay, well, great. One last thing to wrap it up. If you are interested, again, we have a webcast that is next Wednesday at the same time, 10 o'clock. We're going to be covering a lot of NLP-related topics. And for those of you who would like to dig into the tutorial that Jans was showing, also here on our blog post is a link to that example, and it also will take you to the full set of tutorial elements for AllegroGraph. But this one specifically is just exactly what Jans covered. So again, we thank you for your time, and we will send an email with the recording and the slides here shortly. And have a nice rest of your day. Thanks a lot.